Vivid verses.
It was a Tuesday in the third week of October, and I had been home for 11 minutes when she said it. I know it was 11 minutes because I had checked the time when I pulled into the driveway, 6:22, and I checked it again when she said what she said because something in my brain registered that a timestamp might matter later. 6:33, 11 minutes. Long enough to hang my jacket, pour a glass of water, ask about her day, and make the mistake of mentioning the bank notification that had come through on my phone at 3:47 that afternoon. I want to be clear about what our life looked like before that Tuesday, because what came after only makes sense against that backdrop. We had been together for 9 years, married for 6. We live in a house I had put the down payment on, $42,000, money I had spent 4 years saving before we were even engaged. I ran a small commercial HVAC firm, Rankin Climate Solutions, which I had built from a 2-man operation into a 12-employee company over a decade. I worked most Saturdays. I had not taken a vacation longer than 4 days in 3 years. Thea worked part-time at a design consultancy and brought home, on average, about $20 to $100 a month. That was fine. I had never once mentioned the disparity. The notification that came through at 3:47 was from our joint checking account. A transfer of $180 to an account I didn't recognize. I might not have thought anything of it. Utilities, subscriptions, a vendor I'd forgotten about, except that I'd seen a nearly identical notification 2 weeks before, and one before that. And when I scrolled back through the alerts I'd been half reading for over a year, the pattern was so clean, it almost looked intentional in its spacing. $140 here, $175 there, never more than $200, never less than $90, always to the same routing number, always on a weekday, never a weekend. I didn't say any of that on the Tuesday. I just mentioned, while standing at the kitchen counter, that I had gotten an alert about a transfer and asked if she knew what it was for. She was at the table behind me. I heard her set her mug down. "You've always needed to feel like you're in control of everything," she said. "That's your problem, not mine." I didn't turn around immediately. She didn't answer the question. Notice that. She answered a different question, one I didn't ask. I turned around. She was looking at me with an expression I recognized, the one that came just before she reframed an argument into a referendum on my character. I had seen it maybe 30 times in 6 years. I had never learned to like it. "I'm asking about a bank transfer," I said. "You're always asking about something." She picked her mug back up, checking the accounts, checking the statements. It's exhausting to live with. She's naming a pattern without explaining the transfer. That's not an explanation. That's a misdirect. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, "Okay," and I went upstairs. I was not angry. I want to be precise about that. I was not angry because anger is a reaction, and I had already moved past reacting. Something had shifted in my chest. Not hot, not sharp, but still, like a gear catching. I went to my home office, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. I did not tell her what I was doing. I did not tell anyone. I spent the next 2 evenings reconstructing 14 months of transaction history. I'm not a forensic accountant, but I know how to read a spreadsheet, and I know how to sort column by payee. By the end of the second evening, I had a document I did not name anything dramatic. I just called it review.xlsx. But what it contained was, in retrospect, a complete case. Start at the beginning. Don't editorialize. Just list. The first transfer had occurred on August 14th of the prior year, 14 months before that Tuesday kitchen conversation. $95. The destination account had a routing number that traced to a mid-sized regional credit union. Not our credit union. Not any institution we had a joint account with. Not a name I recognized from any of our bills, vendors, or subscription services. After that first transfer, $120 on September 3rd, $150 on September 29th, $140 on October 11th. I stopped listing them individually in my head and started looking at totals. By December of that year, she had moved $710. By March of the current year, the cumulative total was $1,840. By the Tuesday, she told me my need for control was my problem. The running total across 53 individual transactions was $7,240. $7,240. Not a rounding error. Not an accident. 6 specific moments sharpened into focus as I worked backward through the timeline. In September of the prior year, 3 weeks after the first transfer, I had written a $3,800 check to cover an emergency roof repair on the house. I had not asked her to contribute. I had not mentioned it was coming from money I had been holding as a personal reserve. I paid it, scheduled the contractor, and moved on. In November that year, I had covered a $1,100 car repair on her vehicle after the transmission began slipping. She had mentioned on a Sunday, and by Wednesday the car was in the shop, paid in full, no discussion required. She had thanked me. I remembered that specifically because she had reached across the table and put her hand on mine and said, "Thank you for always handling things." I had thought nothing of it at the time. I was thinking about it now. In February, the same month, her transfers totaled a cumulative $1,400. I had declined a weekend trip with 2 of my former colleagues because I felt the firm's cash position was too tight to justify discretionary travel. I stayed home. I worked a Saturday job in the cold, pulling duct through a commercial retrofit, and came home to dinner already cleared away. In April, I had co-signed a small personal loan for her sister, Donna, because Thea had asked me to, and I had said yes without making her explain why she needed me specifically to be the one to do it. The loan was for $6,000. I was not on the hook for it yet, but I was on the hook for it. In June, 3 months before that Kitchen Tuesday, I had received a bonus from a large commercial contract, $14,000, and deposited it directly into our joint account without withdrawing a personal amount first, which I had done with previous bonuses. I had wanted to shore up the household position. I had told her about it. She had said, "That's great, babe," and gone back to her phone. And in August, 1 month before that Tuesday, she had asked me to cancel the subscription to the financial planning app one used to track our joint expenses because she found it, and I remember the exact word she chose, surveilling. I had canceled it. I thought I was being considerate. I was removing the instrument I would have needed to catch this sooner. By the end of the second evening, I had a complete picture. It was not a picture of someone stealing. It was something more specific than that. It was a picture of someone building something carefully, patiently, with deliberate spacing so no single transfer would trip a wire, while simultaneously making sure I had no clear line of sight to what was being built. I did not have a name for the account she was building into. Not yet. I would have one within 72 hours. I formed a plan. I called no one. I told no one. You've always needed to feel like you're in control of everything. Fine. Let's find out who's actually been in control. The first thing I did was make an appointment with a lawyer. Her name was Carol Briggs, and she came recommended by a colleague whose divorce had been, by his description, thorough. I met with her on a Thursday afternoon in a small conference room on the 2nd floor of a building 6 blocks from my office. I brought the spreadsheet printed. I brought 14 months of bank statements highlighted. I brought the routing number. Carol looked at the documents for about 4 minutes without speaking. Then she looked up and said, "How long have you known about this?" 8 days, I said. She nodded slowly. "And she doesn't know you know?" "Correct. She's already 3 steps ahead." "Good. I need someone 3 steps ahead." Carol told me several things in that first meeting. She told me that the account, which she helped me identify through the routing number as an individual savings account at a credit union Thea, had opened 18 months prior, before the transfers began, had a name attached to it in a document Carol's paralegal had already pulled. The account was listed under Thea's maiden name. Carol showed me a screenshot of the credit union's account summary page, obtained through a process I did not ask her to elaborate on. The account name, as listed, was Thea Morrow Emergency Savings. Carol said, "People sometimes call these escape funds." I said, "I know." I did not say anything else for a moment. 18 months. She opened it 2 months before the first transfer. She planned this before she started. Carol outlined what would need to happen next. I listened. I did not interrupt. When she finished, I asked 2 questions, received 2 answers, and shook her hand. I had a retainer agreement signed by the following Monday. The second thing I did was nothing. For 11 days, I did nothing visibly different. I came home at the same time. I made dinner twice. I asked about her week. I watched her watch television. I was patient the way a chess player is patient. Not passively, but because I could see 6 moves ahead and none of them required urgency. On the 12th day, I came home, sat down at the kitchen table across from her, and opened my laptop. I turned it toward her without saying anything. The spreadsheet was open. 53 rows. 14 months. Sorted by date, destination account in the 3rd column, amount in the 4th. The cumulative total was visible in a bolded cell at the bottom. $7,240. She looked at the screen. Then she looked at me. "What is this?" "I think you know what it is. She's going to try 2 things. Watch." "I don't. This isn't." She stopped. Started again. "Where did you get this?" "Our bank statements." "You've been..." She gestured to the laptop. "You've been tracking me." There it is. She's making it about the tracking, not the transfers. Expected. "I've been reading our bank statements," I said, "which I have access to, because it's our joint account." She was quiet for a moment. Then her eyes filled, and the crying started. Not slow, not building, but immediate like a switch. I watched it happen. "The crying isn't the conversation I need right now," I said. The room was very still. She expected that to work. It has worked before. It is not working now. "I need you to tell me about the account at Hartfield Credit Union," I said. "The one in your maiden name. The one you've been moving money into for 14 months. The color left her face in a way I had not seen before. Not guilt, something more specific than guilt. The specific expression of someone who believed they had been careful and has just discovered they were not. "What do you know about that?" "It's a matter of record," I said. I didn't elaborate. She cried harder. She said I was being cold. She said she had been scared. She said she was just protecting herself. She said I had no idea what it was like to feel financially dependent on someone, and I had never once tried to understand it. She said a lot of things, and I let her say all of them, and I did not interrupt once. And when she was finished, I said, "I've spoken with a lawyer. I'd encourage you to do the same." I closed the laptop and stood up. "You've always needed to feel like you're in control of everything." One of us was right about that. The calls began 4 days later. The first was from her mother, Brenda, who I had always liked, and who called me on a Saturday morning while I was in the driveway with a cup of coffee. "She's devastated," Brenda said. I need to understand what's happening." "I hear that," I said. "Did she tell you what started this?" A pause. "She said you went through her private accounts." She framed the account as private. Our joint account as a surveillance tool. Good to know the version that's circulating. "Did she tell you about the 14 months of transfers from our joint account?" I said, "The account we both contribute to pay our share bills?" Silence. "Longer this time." "No," Brenda said. "She didn't mention that." "I understand," I said. "I hope you'll talk to her." I thanked her for calling and ended it there. The second call came from Thea's closest friend, a woman named Portia, who worked with her at the consultancy and who I had shared a dozen dinners with over the years. Portia was direct. "I think you're handling this in a way that's really hurtful," she said. "You didn't even try to talk to her first. She has Thea's version. In Thea's version, I found out and immediately lawyered up without a conversation. In that version, I'm the one who shut the door. Did she tell you about the conversation we had in the kitchen? I said, the one where I mentioned the bank notification and she told me my need for control was my problem? Portia went quiet. Because that was the conversation, I said. I try to have it. That was the response I got. She told me you were going through her accounts. Did she tell you about the transfers? A pause that stretched. No. I think there may be some context missing for what she shared, I said. I'd encourage you to ask her about the account at Hartfield Credit Union and the amount. I thanked Portia and let her go. The third was from Thea's cousin Ray, who I had watched football with for 3 straight Novembers, and who opened the call by saying he just wanted me to know that the family was pretty upset. I let him say what he'd come to say. Then I asked, did she mention that it was a separate account she'd been funding for 14 months without telling me? Ray said what? Asked her about the account, I said. I'll let her explain it. He didn't know. None of them knew. She told them a story about my reaction and left out the part that caused it. The fourth contact was a text from her friend group's de facto center, a woman named Simone, who sent me a paragraph about empathy and how I was approaching this situation from a place of power and not making space for her fear. I read it twice. Then I responded with one line. Did she tell you about the $7,240? 3 minutes later, Simone sent back. No, she didn't. I didn't respond to that. The fifth was the one I had not anticipated. It came on a Wednesday evening from a man named Greg, who was Thea's closest male friend, the person she had known longest outside her family, the person who would be, in any fair accounting, a member of her inner circle. Greg had been at our wedding. He had been to our house for dinner at least a dozen times. If anyone was going to carry her version and carry it with full conviction, it was Greg. He called at 7:14 in the evening. I was at my kitchen table. I talked to Thea, he said. I figured. And then I called my sister, he said, because she went through something similar. And she told me some things that made me want to call you. He paused. I'm not going to pretend I'm not her friend, but I've also known you for a long time. And I asked Thea directly, I asked her point blank, whether she had told you about the account before any of this started and whether you'd had a chance to actually discuss it. I waited. She said no. Greg said. She said she'd been planning to, but she hadn't yet. Another pause. I'm not calling to take sides. I'm calling because I think you deserve to know that I know what actually happened. And I'm sorry this is where things ended up. There it is. Her version has a crack in it, and the crack came from inside her own camp. I registered it. I let a breath out slowly. I appreciate that, Greg, I said. I genuinely do. Are you? How are you doing with all of it? I'm clear, I said. That's the best word I have for it. He said he was sorry again. I told him it wasn't his fault. I meant it. That night, Thea called me from what I assumed was a friend's house. She had been staying elsewhere for the better part of 2 weeks. Her voice was different than it had been in the kitchen. Not the crying voice, but something flatter. I know you've been talking to people, she said. People have been calling me, I said. You're turning everyone against me. I have not said one negative thing about her to any of them. Not one. I asked one question each time. She did the rest. I've answered questions when people called to ask them, I said. That's all. Greg is barely talking to me. Her voice cracked on the last word. You've already won. Can you just stop? I said. I'm not trying to win anything, Thea, but I also won't pretend the account doesn't exist. She hung up. You've always needed to feel like you're in control of everything. You opened that account 26 months ago. You've been planning this since before I had any idea there was something to plan for. Tell me again which one of us needed control. The transformation began in the 3rd week of November, 11 days after the Greg phone call, 14 days after Carol filed the initial paperwork. It began with an email. Carol forwarded it to me on a Monday morning with a single line of her own above Thea's message. Her attorney sent this through me. Worth reading. The email from Thea's attorney was 2 paragraphs. The first acknowledged the existence of the Hartfield Credit Union account and the transfers. The second stated that Thea was prepared to return the full $7,240 to the joint account and requested in exchange that certain conditions be discussed before the formal proceedings advance further. Carol called me at noon. She wants to talk, Carol said. Her attorney wants a meeting. Okay, I said. She's offering the money back. That's not a negotiation. That's an acknowledgement that she knows she can't defend it. The meeting happened 2 days later at Carol's office, around a small table in that same second-floor conference room. Thea came with her attorney, a careful man named Paul Eddington, who spoke precisely and said little that wasn't necessary. Carol sat across from him. Thea sat across from me. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had been carrying a story and had recently been told, by enough people she trusted, that the story had a problem. I will not recount the full meeting because most of it was legal mechanics. But there were several moments that mattered. At one point, Paul Eddington said that Thea had acted out of financial insecurity stemming from an inequitable dynamic in the household, and he was prepared to argue that the transfers represented a good faith attempt at self-protection. Carol looked at me. I looked at Paul Eddington. The down payment on the house was $42,000, I said, which I contributed entirely from personal savings accrued before the marriage. The emergency roof repair in September of last year was $3,800, which I covered without discussion. The transmission repair on her vehicle in November was $1,100, which I covered within 72 hours of her mentioning it. I declined a discretionary work trip in February because I wanted to protect the household financial position. I deposited a $14,000 bonus directly into the joint account in June without withdrawing any personal allocation. And I am currently co-signed on a $6,000 personal loan for her sister that I agreed to without asking for documentation or repayment terms. I paused. If that's an inequitable dynamic, I'd like to understand the definition being used. Paul Eddington made a small note and did not respond. That was the audit, delivered once, calmly, in the room where it mattered most. Thea looked at the table. A colleague of mine named Rick had stopped by my office the week before, when word had begun to circulate in the way that word does, and he had looked at me for a long moment and said, "I've never seen you like this, man. I don't know. You seem different." I had told him, "I'm not different. I'm just finally looking at something clearly instead of around it." He had shaken his head slowly. "It's a little unsettling, honestly." I had filed that away. At the meeting near the end, when the mechanics had been largely worked through and Thea's attorney was reviewing a document, Thea looked up at me for the first time with something that was not crying and not performance. "I did plan it," she said. "I want you to know that I know you know that." Her voice was quiet. "I opened the account and I planned it, and I told myself it was just a safety net. But I know what it was." I looked at her. I did not say anything for a moment. "Okay," I said. "I'm sorry," she said, "for the account, and for what I said in the kitchen." She paused. "You didn't need to be in control of everything. I just didn't know how to say I was scared. So I made it about you." She just answered the question I asked the night all of this started. 11 minutes. 6 weeks ago. She's answering it now. I nodded once. "I heard you," I said. The concrete changes came quickly enough that Carol mentioned it. "Usually these things move slower," she said, on a call the following week. The full return of funds, the financial disclosure, the removal of her name from the cosign on Donna's loan. That's a lot in 10 days. "The timeline doesn't matter to me," I said. "What matters is whether it's real." The $7,240 was returned to the joint account on a Thursday, transferred in a single amount, confirmed by Carol's paralegal via a bank statement with a date stamp. Thea's name was formally removed from our joint checking, and replaced with a properly documented separation of accounts going forward. She filed a complete financial disclosure that her attorney had resisted for 2 weeks and then stopped resisting. The Hartfield Credit Union account, the escape fund, was closed. The closure confirmed in a document dated November 21st, which Carol received by certified mail. Donna's loan cosign was released after a 3-way call with the lending institution, Thea, and her attorney. Thea took on sole responsibility for it. She did not make it a condition, and she did not ask me to acknowledge the gesture. She just did it. Greg called me 2 days before Thanksgiving. Not about the proceedings, just to talk. He told me Thea had been staying with her mother. He told me she had stopped asking people to call me on her behalf. He said she told me she finally explained everything. The real version. To her mom. To Portia. He paused. Her mom cried. "I like Brenda," I said. "I know you do," Greg said. The last exchange I had with Thea directly was brief. She called on a Monday after Thanksgiving, in the evening. She asked if the paperwork Carol had sent over was the final version. I said I believed it was. She said okay. Then, before she hung up, she said, "You know what I keep thinking about? I keep thinking about what I said to you that night. In the kitchen. I keep thinking about how I turn it around on you." I waited. "You didn't need to feel in control," she said. "You needed to know the truth." "That's different." "Yes," I said. "It is." She was quiet for a moment. "Goodbye, Owen," she said. "Goodbye," I said. And that was the end of it. There's a version of this story where I spent 6 weeks angry, and it shows, and I give people the opportunity to rally around the anger rather than the facts. I did not tell that version. I'm not particularly interested in that version. What I know is this. The moment she said your need for control is your problem, that night in the kitchen, 11 minutes after I walked in the door, she was right that one of us had a need for control. She had opened a private account 18 months before I found it. She had moved $7,200 into it in carefully spaced increments designed not to be noticed. She had removed the financial tracking tool I used to watch our accounts. She had turned 5 phone calls worth of friends against a version of me who had been, in her retelling, surveilling her, when what I had actually done was read our joint bank statements. One of us needed control. I am at peace with which one it was. The transfers stopped the moment I put the spreadsheet on the table. Not because I threatened anything, because the screen showed 14 months of dates and amounts and routing numbers, and I said nothing else, and I let the screen do what I had always let the evidence do. You've always needed to feel like you're in control of everything. She was right that it was someone's problem. She was wrong about whose.
Thanks for listening.